Thank you for the invitation to present this topic on global monitoring. So I think it's important to note that we do have already some monitoring in different parts of the world within different frameworks. But what we are trying to do actually with some other scientists, colleagues, and managers is to set up a more global assessment of monitor. So I will try to describe the different steps, how we do work, where are the challenges and so on. So first of all, I will just remind that most of the attendants are probably knowing about monitor already, but it's quite important to remind that without healthy ocean and waters, there is just simply no life on Earth. And for that, we do have to face many challenges, to reach good environmental status of our oceans. And these are related to human footprint, climate change, lack of knowledge, and so on. These are the main gaps, and also inadequate governance in many parts of the world. So monitor is known as being particularly pervasive, and it's everywhere. It's the most abundant, and plastic is the most abundant part of monitor because it will remain for centuries at sea. And we do have some recent estimates indicating that we have more than 5,000 billions of plastic pieces that are floating at the surface of the sea, probably far more on the seafloor, but there is no estimation until now done. And also recent papers have indicated that we may switch from 8-10 millions of plastics entering the oceans to more than 20 millions in just a few years, 20 years from now. So these are based on models, but it's quite interesting to follow the data. And typically, there are more plastics entering the ocean, actually. So we know about the impact of marine litter and plastic, more plastic in general marine litter and then plastics. We know that entanglement is probably the most impacting type of litter because nets have been crafted to kill, and they are even lost or abandoned. They are still killing animals, any kind of, not just only fish. And ingestion is quite important also by different types, including microplastics for small organisms, and larger debris for larger organisms like sea turtles that are more, or some birds that are more affected. We do have also contamination through microplastic ingested, even if it's a minor vector for contamination. We do have also transportation of different species. I remind you that after the tsunami, it was something like 300 species that have been traveling from western part to the eastern part of the North Pacific, and then reaching the North American coast. So something like Noah's Ark. It has never been seen before in the story of biology. So it could be really important in terms of impact. And then we do have also social impact, the way the people are changing, the way they are behaving. And with all many costs associated to that, it has been evaluated at the level of 250 million euros in Europe only, but $12 billion worldwide. And we do have also some impact on human, like the problem of quality of seafood, chemicals, injuries, and so on beach. So you see where we are. And the question is about monitoring, global monitoring, is that it has been conceptual only for many years, and it's quite difficult to manage because it's something like we cannot master. It's not just counting on the beach. It must go, more globally, and it's really a challenge. So about governance, the first statement on global monitoring was from the G7 in 2015 under the presidency of Germany, where it was proposed. I was personally involved with that. I'm really happy. It was proposed to have a global platform to monitor marine litter as part of the assessment and before the reduction measures to be taken. The following year, the G20 also launched its platform, marine litter platform, and then it was stated in 2017 by Italy, under the presidency of Italy, that I mean, all initiatives that are global, especially regional sea convention that are all contributing to a more global assessment are important in terms of monitoring monitor. And then the question was raised last year at UNEA, where global monitoring was mentioned. And the question was about, I mean, actually there are two groups. One is the ad hoc experts group on monitor. It's more on governance, and they are planning to launch a new convention on monitor, but there could be a supporting group for that, technical group, and to follow all the scientific questions, but also monitoring and assessments. So in Europe, we have the EU mission Starfish that was launched a few weeks ago only, and that will support a lot of initiatives on the reduction of pollution, and for sure considering marine. What is interesting is that the field of marine has been considered as by the recovery package of the European Commission. So it's at the level of 550 billion euros. Yes, it's clear, 550 billion euros, including plans to recycle plastic, for instance, and also tertiary treatment for wastewater treatment plants. So it means trying to solve the problem of microplastic in wastewater. But what is interesting also is that the funding of this initiative, the recovery package, will be through the taxation of the industry when they are crafting non-recyclable plastic. So it's quite interesting because the political agenda has been very fast. From the scientific point of view, the different step was first in G7, under the G7 in Japan. It was in 2016, where indicators were first discussed to support global monitoring. So it was just something like a starting point, I would say. And then we had different sessions at international meetings, such as IMDC in San Diego. And there was a session dedicated to global monitoring. And then there was a different meeting from IEE and EOS and GeoBlue Planet organized to discuss all this aspect. Oceanops also had one session dedicated to Marinitor and one endorsed paper. Then GeoBlue Planet is linking with Ocean Decade, is planning to have a report published very soon, and some activities then coming where global monitoring will be considered, I would say, in deep. Beside, from the UN side, we had the GISAP report in 2019, providing some guidelines in terms of harmonization. And again, the white paper that will come. And then we have some, we had last September OBPS meeting on Marinitor best practice to support monitoring. And there will be more and more coming probably, so that we may find a way to harmonize all the initiatives together. So this was just to mention the basis of monitoring. So what do you want to know, in fact, when you are monitoring? So there are different questions where monitoring may answer. These are about amounts, location of litter, for sure. Is there any trend? Is there a specific source, for instance? What kind of impact we may discover, for instance? One of the most important points about monitoring is that it's really efficient to monitor the efficiency of measures, reduction measures. And that's one of the reasons, politicians are really supporting this kind of approach, globally first, but then global monitoring also, to see whether when they are banning, for instance, single-use plastic, trying to recover fishing nets on the sea, from the seafloor, it is really relevant or not. Okay, we do have a lot of actors also involved. So we actually have some global platforms. All the regional sea convention together with some database organized at regional level, but that may be harmonized. Actually, for instance, the European Commission is gathering the data from regional sea conventions for some indicators on our litter, like a C4 litter. We do have also some large-scale platforms, like GEOS, for instance, and GOOS, for instance, may largely be involved in the development of global monitoring. We have also regional non-UN platforms. So I'm stating just two examples in Europe because this is where I'm working now. But ICES, for instance, is International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, is maintaining a database on seafloor, with data coming from trawling. It's quite interesting because sampling is already organized, so it has been a really low cost, I will say. Started a new database named DOME on microplastics, but ICIS has a sister institution in the Pacific, PICIS, who is also considering bimeter, in the Mediterranean also, CESN, and we may have a different regional platform working together to harmonize. And Europe, for instance, with this MSLE Marine Strategy Framework Directive, and a database EMONET is also organizing, coordinating, and assessing mariners through monitoring. National platform may be very efficient in some cases, large country for sure, but even, smaller states. We all know about the work done by CSIRO, SOA, for instance, US NOAA on beach, for instance. The work is really highly relevant and supporting long-term assessments. What is interesting with Marinter is that large NGOs, non-governmental organizations, are very, very, very active. Not only large, but smaller also. But in terms of global monitoring, they may play an important role because they are already organized to work at a global level. These large NGOs. International Cleanup, for instance, has already data from many, many countries all over the world. AWA, for instance, is another initiative where the divers are collecting litter from harbors, then from seafloor. So we see actually some scientific papers that are published dealing with data coming from these initiatives. Also ghost nets on the fishing net on the seafloor. And you see that, we may have to rely on NGOs first when considering monitoring. I know that from different states, like in France, for instance, the official monitoring for the European directive is done for beach litter by NGOs that are contracted on a regular basis. And so then we have some initiative from scientific institutions like JAMSTEC for the seafloor data, where they did analyze video from submersibles. So it's more an opportunistic approach. You can collect data from any dive that is everywhere in the world, put all the data in the same database, and then try to extract all the information about trends, locations, and so on. Data could be also collected from diving, so it could be shallow waters, and with a lot of interest because it may cover all the seafloor everywhere, more than trawling that could be limited to some soft bottom in some countries only. So, as said before, the UN Regional Sea Convention is a good way to harmonize, I will say, but will be limited to some, it's not really hard science, I will say, it's more taking the data from local initiative altogether. So the main problem will be to harmonize the way the UN Regional Sea Conventions are working. So to do that, we have the support of KESAM that launched some guidelines to monitor and harmonize. I will not go in detail on that because most of the people know it already, and it's quite easy to find. But it's just to say that there is a good support from UN and maybe taking the lead in some for some indicators like beach litter, for instance, to monitor. And it's quite important to remind that they may be active. So we have a lot of methods to assess litter. Some of them are highly relevant in terms of monitoring, some are not. Some are experimental, so I will not go in detail in these different methods, but actually, there is a focus in terms of research on satellite imagery or detection more generally, IR surveys, drones, and so on, also visual observation, and many different approaches. And some may not be relevant in terms of harmonization, but useful to characterize these types of polymers, colors, and so on. So it's complicated to select the right method, and this is one of the challenges we have to face. So what we have to monitor, does the size matter? So it's quite complicated because just only the definitions are not clear. For the size, for instance, we all know about the microplastics that in fact cannot be relying on the international system. Microplastics doesn't mean micro in the sense of it goes from 1 micron to 1,000 micron. Microplastics must be felt like a generic word, like microbiology, microorganisms. So it just means small in terms of size. And the reason is that if we want to rely the term microplastics on international system and international conventions, then we'll have to do for all types of litter. then it means that we will have to redefine what a macroliter is, and we have to consider some wording like deciliter, centiliter, you see milliliter, more than just when I mean microplastic is quite clear, it's just related to this general size only. And so it's the same with morphology. We have to consider the different types of shapes and so on. What about the colors? It may be important for some organisms when you consider ingested microplastic, for instance, when it's not for some other organisms. So it could be partial information only. And composition is the same. I mean, you will have more PVC on the seafloor. And so it could be more interesting to assess all these characteristics to understand and to better define, you know, the cycling of plastics and so on, rather than just checking the trends, unless we see, for instance, more microplastic with the time because of the degradation and so on. But more generally, I mean, we do have to select indicators that are really expressing, I would say, change in the environment or in the impact and so on, rather than just describing how marine is behaving at sea. So we have a lot of constraints to support good implementation of marine monitoring. I mean, those in red in my presentation are related to best practices. But you see that, I mean, we have scientific constraints, we have methodological constraints, we have environmental constraints, logistical. For instance, I mean, logistical means, I mean, it's quite complicated to monitor the deep sea floor if you want to go regularly, on regular basis, I would say, and try to count, for instance, the type of macro. Then you will need, I mean, important means to do that, and it could be, high cost and then limiting, you know, the monitoring. Ethical also, I mean, the sampling cannot be destructive. I mean, this is a problem, for instance, with trawling, actually. We have a lot of monitoring done through trawling. It's quite well in terms of sampling strategy, it's quite informative. It's partial soft bottom, but it's quite interesting to see the trends and so on. But I mean, it's very highly descriptive, and it's possible that in the time, in 20 years from now, I mean, trawling will have been phased out and replaced by some other fishing technologies and so on, then meaning that data from trawling may not be relevant anymore. You see, and also the protection status of some species when you consider harm, for instance, is quite important. So we have a lot of constraints that we have to consider before starting. And what is important also is that we have to harmonize, and it's a very important task. The reason is that we have to reduce uncertainty, we have to allow comparability, for instance, data sharing and so on, international cooperation, disseminate good practice everywhere, but there is not so much done in terms of good practice, actually. And also linking with the ocean decade and the development of indicators, indicators. So again, we do have already some guidelines. I mean, the methods will be improved probably in the next years. We have some challenge to face. I will come back on that. I mean, the guideline from GESAM, they did provide some recommendation. You can see this table, for instance. On the left, you have the different compartments, for instance, shoreline, seafloor, and so on. You have the sub-compartments, beach, invertebrate, for biota, and so on. And then the policy concerns on the right. And it's quite interesting that if you consider, for instance, the third line, it's a seafloor, then, for instance, you will have information on different policies, such as distribution, source identification, but you will not have any information on seafood safety and so on. So depending on the policy concern you have and the question you have, then you will select the most appropriate approach, I will say. It's not a question of techniques, but more approach. And so you will see that seafloor monitoring, curiously, is really interesting because it covers a lot of policy concerns. You will have information on distribution, source, tourism in some case, I mean, shallow waters, for instance. You may have some navigation on hazards and for trawlers, fishing and aquaculture also, because we have a lot of derelict fishing here, and animal welfare and so on. So you see that depending on what you want to do, I mean, you have to select the most appropriate approach. Then, I mean, this is a work that is underway, I will say. It's not done already. I mean, nobody has already selected indicators for more global monitoring, but we do our arguments. Again, if I take the example of seafloor, for instance, trawling, but then it cannot be upscaled to global just because many countries don't trawl at all. They don't have, bottoms that are trawlable. And so it's impossible to collect any data. And then imagery by diving or ROV, for instance, would be probably more interesting, as I was explaining before. There are already some initiative done. And so in terms of stage of monitoring where we are, upscalability, the availability of protocols, existing of database, harmonization, break practices, and how to manage all the processes, for instance. They are more or less advanced, the different indicators, and the next step would be to really select the most appropriate for global monitoring. So just some examples. I mean, the top left is the work that was coordinated by Marcus Ericsson, was published years ago. There are more experiments done in that field, but what that was interesting is that it was the analysis has been built on more than 13,000 manta trawl experiments. So it was covering all oceans worldwide, and enough data to validate the model, and then estimation are probably reliable. And this is exactly the kind of information that is maybe highly relevant. The only problem is that it's complicated to do regularly on that. And so we have to face, I mean, the problem of cost and various approaches in harmonizing. So we may have this kind of survey again in the future that will be highly relevant to see how the change have been done. Top right, you have the example of a seafloor litter in Europe. So the data are collected in database EMONET. So all the states are providing data on the same, using the same tool for the Mediterranean. I mean, you have more data than those that are shown. You are from Italy, Greece, Spain, Slovenia, Cyprus, and so on, more. And it's quite interesting because this is a good example of having more than 10, 12 countries working together with providing each of them some data using the same protocol and then gathering all and trying to evaluate the trends and so on, and composition and so on, just by different contributors at a large scale. So it has been working well. It's still regional, and it may not fit also with the approach that are used in other parts of the world. I mean, I know that, for instance, Japan is using microplastic by unit of volume, and when Europe is using by unit of surface, there may be some good argument to use both or argument against. But I mean, we have then to harmonize this kind of technical differences. Top right, you have an example of modeling and showing that all the waste that has been generated in Europe are all just traveling to the West Caribbean. And so the process is known because of equatorial currents. It's the same in the Pacific. It's the same in the southern part of Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Ocean too. I mean, all still geostrophic currents that are bringing the litter very far with a lot of consequence. And so in terms of monitoring, modeling could be also helpful. But the problem is that model must be better validated because actually it works well for large-scale features, patterns, but when you consider local and coastal processes, it's more complex to integrate all the factors that are interfering, such as turbulence, riverine inputs, and so on. So it's highly complex in terms of prediction and regular monitoring, and also in terms of validation. So there is still some work on model. So these were just some examples on that. So we have to face some challenges in terms of technology and cost-effective methods, automation of measurements, quite important, small-scale measurements, especially small microplastics, even nanoplastics, without so much information until now. We are far from developing monitoring of regular monitoring of nanoplastic. We just have first to set up methods to correctly assess them. We have also to work on solutions using the data coming from monitoring and then data management, for instance. We may have another new type of approach, risk assessment, with different way to do that. It's not just only, I mean, having a dose-response relationship, but we may have, for instance, something like cross-mapping distribution of litter and distribution of species to know exactly where the impact will be the most important. And so you see that monitoring could be changed a lot in just in a few years because it's really fast field. Important also is to understand that the monitoring and best practices are formal processes. It's not just saying that what you are doing is good or what I'm doing is good. It's just that we have to follow a specific process and with some codes regularly and some proof that the work has been done correctly. So we have to start from the strategy, what type of indicators, what kind of temporal trend we want, then to fix the protocols, harmonization, intercalibration are necessary and not so well addressed until now. Quality check of the data, then data put all together. And what is, we do have also some specific steps that are important in terms of monitoring and use of data for monitoring in terms of management. These are baselines, exactly to know where we are starting from, and then thresholds. Threshold that could be operational with targets that could be operational, environmental or political. So you may have, something like a good level of monitor that has been determined by science, but political policymakers would like to change it because their target would be different. They want something faster than what is possible, for instance. So we have these kind of steps are very important. We do have some examples. I know some examples in Europe, for instance, but I know that some are working the same way in other parts of the world. So one of the examples is the what you call CEMP. This is a document that is prepared by OSPAR to support all OSPAR indicators. OSPAR is a regional sea convention. This means convention of OSPAR and Paris, Oslo and Paris, and that were merged 30 years ago. And they are in charge of monitoring the different indicators for the environment, the quality of the environment, including some environmental. One is the ingestion of plastic by fulmar birds, by sea turtles in the southern part of Northeast Atlantic. Also, we do have also a monitoring of beach litter. We are considering monitoring of microplastic, and we have also seafloor monitoring. And for each of the indicators, we have specific sheets that all operators must have to follow and strictly consider in the to support the implementation of the monitoring. And this is a first step to best practice to support large-scale monitoring. So example of baseline, it has been done in Europe, for instance. So it was started in 2017. First, just to set up all the concepts, methodology, checking the data, aggregating when necessary. And in fact, we have a large survey, large coverage of beach surveys. And it's quite interesting because we can see, huge difference and different trends and so on. And if you go to result by country or basin, you will see that, baseline could be very different from one area to another one. And so it's quite complicated to set up when you consider global monitoring. If we do need one baseline only or different baseline from the different areas. And this is especially true when you consider threshold and with different concepts. Threshold means that what is good for the environment. And you all understand that, defining what is good in terms of amounts of marine litter is difficult to define when you want to have an idea of the quality of the environment. So on the beach, for instance, it could be just aesthetic impact. And then what is good will be a clean beach, for instance, could be good. But in terms of environment, could be completely different. And also in some compartment of the marine environment, you may have different types of impact together. And then if you could set one threshold for one type, having different type of threshold could be more complicated to define. So we have 0 options, so no litter everywhere. Value of no return, cutoff values, expert judgment, so it's more subjective, I would say. Public acceptance, so you see the list of the way strategy to define the threshold. It's really complicated because it will depend on the compartment, it will depend on the indicator, it will depend on the means you have, it will depend on the policymakers. And so it's really, really complicated to harmonize and to find this, common threshold. So one example is on bleach litter. I mean, a few weeks ago was launched the first European threshold value for bleach litter and marine litter in general. So it was based on comparable bleach litter monitoring data. It was we just selected the most robust data. One of the requirements was to provide also equal protection among the different regions in Europe. Also, the data had to be clean. And then also well defining, I mean, the different assessment scale. So within MSAFD, we selected 1,470 surveys for the 2 years, 2015 and 2016. It was something like half of the data that were retained just because of robustness. And then the strategy was to adopt a calculation of quartile. So either 1 percentile, 10%, 20% of the mean or median value. These were the first strategy proposed to the policymakers. And at the end, it was decided to keep the 15% quartile of the median value. So that is 20 liter per 100 meter. And what is interesting is that it was based on scientific measurements, but in fact, it was decided by policymakers, ministries of environment altogether in Europe, that decided about the value. And it has been a long time to decide because at first it was proposed to have 10%, and some countries were not agreeing on that, saying that it was too constraining in terms of target, because at the end, threshold will become the targets and the political target. And that's the reason why the policymakers are deciding on the targets. And so actually we have something, but we are sure that, I mean, no European member state will be able to reach these targets in the just next cycle, 6 years from now, within the directive, marine strategy from there. So it means that we have now to set up some intermediate targets that will be more political, I will say, just to support a way to reduce, I mean, inputs on marine litter and disappearance of them, of it at sea. And so this is the way to go. So we do have some recommendations in terms of monitoring that are now better understood, I will say. We need to shortlist the most relevant indicators. So this is one of the next steps, and find the most, I mean, the most effective one. So we may keep beach litter because it could be organized by a regional sea convention. Seafloor by diving and aerobies, for instance, could be interesting because it may be upscaled worldwide. Floating microplastics or in sediments also. Ingested litter by mussels because mussel watch is already there. But I mean, we still have to work on the quality of the assessment because we have a lot of contamination. So it's not ready, but it could be something like a focus, I would say. Sea turtles also is working well, such as birds in some areas, but maybe limited for global scale. Then elaborate more formal guidelines. We also to have recommend and support research for different new methods, especially facilitating large-scale assessments. Elaborate best practices and also consider technical workshop to harmonize the different approach. I think that it's time now to conclude my presentation. I just would like to say that there will be a meeting next week, 2 weeks from now, organized by the G20 in December, and just to discuss, I mean, this kind of problems, harmonizing the measurements of microplastic at the sea surface. And it's for G20 countries, but I think it's open to experts also. It could be open to experts. And this is typically a step that is underway, a work that is underway to implement global monitoring. I would like to thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, François, for your really interesting talk. I just want to remind the viewers that they can log on Slido, sli.do, and enter the hash key OPW, like Ocean Plastic Webinars, and they can ask their questions and promote other people's questions to have them answered first. So I will start reading the question to François, and you can just answer them. We have a question from Delphine Lobel from Utrecht University. She says, it seems like there is a huge process from the governance side recently, mainly in Europe. What are some harmonizing challenges to include in developing countries?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, the process was started in Europe, but I mean, actually, the process in Europe is limited to Europe. In terms of implementation to global scale, it's more done by GPML and UNEA. So it's a UN process, and it already involves a lot of developing countries, and it's more dedicated to pitch data actually. And but in terms of global monitoring, there is much done. I mean, in developing countries, that is, I mean, that's been done in Europe only. So I'm really confident about the way to solve that problem. I mean, in any case, we have to start somewhere, you see, and this is the reason probably it was started there.
All right, thank you. We have a question from Anonymous, so I cannot say what university. Thank you for the informative overview. I was wondering how much work has been done to relate the different monitoring methods to produce a complete picture.
It may take 2 years, like it may take 20 years. We don't know, in fact, we're just starting. The problem we have to face is that it's something like really diffuse. We have different initiatives. It's not set. We have to find the funding for that, so state may contribute. We have already some good basis like regional sea conventions, like some initiatives from different institutions. There is a goodwill, but it's something like very diffuse, and it's quite complicated to assemble all these initiatives together. And this is what has been played within UNEA. Even UNEA, UN is facing some problems to solve. You see, it's quite complicated. I mean, some countries will not support, I mean, the monitoring of answering the monitoring of monitor for different reasons. But what is seen is that we have more and more information and more support to that. And that's quite interesting. For instance, the EU mission, for instance, I'm part of the mission board, and we discussed already on the principle there will be some support to do that. Like there will be from GPML, for instance, and you know, if we have international conventions like the one on monitor that's maybe launched, or plastic pollution more than monitor only, then there will be probably some necessary work to support, I mean, this convention, and the global monitoring could be one part of this, that work.
Yes, all right, thank you. I think you partially answered the following question, but I think the listener would like more details about it. It says, I was wondering how much you believe in monitoring paired with modeling can provide information on the full picture. So how do you guys work together, the modelers and the in-situ observers?
So my feeling is that large-scale monitoring will be quite useful because the process and the patterns are more or less permanent, accumulation areas, for instance. So monitoring is also supporting the detection of hotspots, accumulation, where to monitor, for instance, and for that, monitoring will be really helpful. The problem is that monitoring in coastal waters is not already solved, I would say. So it will be probably something like working together to better define the model, so upgrade them, and also collect some information from models, what to act in terms of monitoring and so on. Typically, we are working on that actually in the Mediterranean, and we are working with modelers because we need them to, I mean, to know exactly to improve our strategy in terms of monitoring. So this is the way probably both will work together. That's my feeling.
Okay, okay. I actually had a question, and I think the answer will be quite coherent, is that we can see from the maps you're showing that the observation of marine litter is distributed in a very, I would say, non-linearly, like they're not, the monitoring is not basically everywhere. So how do you take this into account in the monitoring of the global marine litter?
Well, so it depends on the indicator. I mean, we didn't map already all the data from on beach, for instance. But if we do that, I know that GPML did start an experiment in Africa, for instance, and together with IBM, and they already start to map. I mean, and it's quite impressive because we have data from everywhere, mostly, and then it could be a good basis to start. When for some other indicators, it will not be possible to have, I mean, all states involved just because of the means, necessary means. But I mean, science is so that, I mean, it has no border, like Marita, we say. So when an experiment is done using ROV, an ROV, for instance, it may go everywhere in the world at sea. It's not, I mean, related to one country, it's related to the ocean. So it may be working offshore, for instance, very deep. And this data will be collected all together, taking advantage of the opportunistic approach using this type of, it's just a question of analyzing videos, you see. Most of them are freely available. We just have to try to set up image analysis systems to collect and to extract all the information. But at the end, we may use all the dives that are performed everywhere to have a global picture of the snapshot, you see, of the situation, and even analyze trend. This is what JAMSEC did with the seafloor litter. Another point is that we do not have all countries that may be involved, but we have all countries and all seas, I will say, with some protected areas. And it means that protected areas may find the supports to count marine litter. Most of the protected areas, for instance, they are evaluating the quality of the biodiversity by diving, for instance, in many places in the world. And you may consider, I mean, seafloor litter just as an organism, I would say, and count it in addition to the other and collect data. So it could be very simple. You know, for the directive in Europe, marine litter is one of the 11 descriptors, and this is the cheapest descriptors in terms of monitoring. And so it's quite interesting because I cannot see any global monitoring of biodiversity, for instance. But I mean, for monitor, it may be possible, I would say.
Okay, so in the end, the problems that you are facing with marine litter is the same problem that people with biodiversity and even physical observations are facing. If you have very sparse observation, how do you get the entire picture of it? I have a question from EBO Menta Innovation. They want to know, are there any specific grants to equip countries outside of Europe with detection equipments?
There are different, yes, there are many ways to. I mean, I think that will come in the next future. To support monitoring in Europe, it has been more than, I think it was 800 million euros for the last 10 years. So it was more than 80 projects. And I started in 1992, and I've been working alone for about 20 years. And from 2010, because of the marine strategy, it has, I mean, switched to, actually, we have just in France only 50 laboratories, and there are many, many calls and so on. And many of them are considering monitoring, not always globally, but I mean, it's part, and that will come. There will be some dedicated call probably. And once the convention will be organized and under the Regional Sea Convention, the states are also contributing. For instance, in the Mediterranean Sea, actually, Europe is funding more than 3 or 4 million euros, the UNEP map, so the Regional Sea Convention of Barcelona. And in fact, the money is going to the southern part of the Mediterranean, countries from the southern part, to implement monitoring where they don't have any means to do that, you see. So there are different ways to do, either from the science point of view, but also from the management point of view and policy to support implementation of monitoring. Yeah.
Okay. I had a question about large NGOs. You were saying that first we need to rely on large NGOs for the samples and all of this. But how do we make sure that these samples have the quality that we need in science? And how do you evaluate samples that were done in the past before maybe you had protocols, like strict protocols in place?
Yes, so the information may be limited, I understand that. But you see, for instance, the work done by Ocean Cleanup, not Ocean Cleanup, sorry, International Coastal Cleanup, they're categorizing the different types of litter. So this information is quite highly relevant. You may have, I mean, not enough samples in some countries, some beaches and so on, but I mean, ranking the different type of litter is a good information. So immediately you can compare the different countries altogether. And you can select, I mean, the different types of litter that are important to where to take some measures, you see. And so it's not just only on amount of, I understand, I mean, cleaning is not just on regular and scientific monitoring, so that we may have to face some cases in that. But I mean, there could be some relevant information coming from monitoring from, this is the same with Aware, for instance, they are collecting from harbors, so the classification are good. And not only they are cleaning, so we are already at the stage of reduction measures, but also the information is quite interesting. And I mean, I know that scientists are considering the data coming from them, and they are highly relevant, I would say.
Okay, all right. And if I may go further, I didn't.
But just one point is just to say, just one point, just to say that it's opportunistic. So it's not exactly what the scientists may want. It's not the question what the scientists want also, but it's just what is existing may provide, I mean, additional information. And in that sense, it's highly relevant.
Yes, so it's not perfect, but at least it's there, and there are we can find information in these data sets, even though they're not
because
perfect.
It's not dedicated to science, it's dedicated to cleaning, so we understand that. Yeah. And in some cases, we cannot use the data. But EMODNet, for instance, in Europe, is gathering both from science monitoring, I would say, from state, but also from NGOs. Okay. And the two databases are different, but hosted by the same institution.
Okay, but does EMODNet give a ranking of the quality of the data, some kind of like error of measurement or something like this when they decimate this data?
Yes, I mean, the information may be different. You understand? I mean, if you want to know exactly plastics, then you cannot have just from the data from NGOs, except that, I mean, the most important paper published, like the one from Marcus Eriksen, is an NGO for you see. So even when you look at the literature, scientific literature, often you cannot see, but the work done by NGOs is sometimes more relevant than some scientific institution too.
Okay. We have Tom Sprey. I'm sorry if I'm missaying the word, his name, sorry. Is asking, is monitoring of marine litter done in Europe to assess the performance of marine litter interception, infrastructures?
So actually, it's it's very strange because litter is coming from land mainly. We do have some basic sources, but it's mainly coming from land. But the topic is more considered at sea, and for historical reason. There is something probably more exotic. This is our ocean that is affected. So the people have focused for many years on this issue, when in fact the measures are probably better when dealing with prevention. So that is not, I mean, collecting litter at sea, for instance, is a complex task, I would say. Until there is no value, there is no sense to recover. And so, I mean, fishing net, for instance, they can be repaired, they can be recycled, they have some value because they can be reused in some cases. So it makes sense to collect them. And I mean, on beach, this is not the litter you collect that has value, but this is the site when clean that are more value, and that's the reason you're cleaning. But there is some value somewhere, you see. So it could be artificial, non-sustainable, I would say, if you, I mean, craft a shoe like Adidas did, made of plastics from the litter collected at sea. So there is a value somewhere. It's cleaning the ocean. There is a shoe, but it's not sustainable because, in fact, it's a lot of money just for one shoe, you see. And when you find where the value is, then it becomes relevant. This is the reason why we don't collect at sea, because it's high cost. Even if you sell, I will say, the image of cleaning the ocean, it has happened already. Some are trying to collect and clean our ocean, why not? But the value is not really sustainable when preventing from the sea. So it means that information is about the sea, but action is on land mainly, and prevention, new material recycling, and so on. And this is where the people are trying to act. So, I mean, funding the recovery package because of the pandemic at the level of 550 billion euros just by taxing non-recyclable plastics, I think it's a big step, you see. And So, yeah, exactly. And so I'm sure that, I mean, many countries, I know that some countries are more advanced because they don't have an economic sector to produce plastic and so on, so that they be fast and just ban all the plastics. It may take more time in Europe because of that, but I think that, I mean, yes, we focus on measures at online, yes.
Okay, so basically you're saying that putting some fines creates some sort of a value somehow.
Anyhow, I will say, if we find a way to give some value to the litter, then it's
Yes.
okay. But understanding that having no litter has more value.
Mm-hmm. Tom also asked on the current topic regarding the quality of data. Remember that we are talking about macro garbage. On such a large scale, the precision isn't so important. Do you have comments on this?
Yes, I mean, we have important patterns where they're accumulating hotspots and so on. It's a problem. You see, I would like, maybe I can try to show you some images. Is that possible to?
Yeah, sure. Go back to
yes, I will
sharing
try
your
to
screen.
do that, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I will share my screen. Excuse me. Okay, you see it?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so have a look. These are images from ROV. It's 8 kilometers offshore in the Mediterranean Sea, and we are at 2,200 meters. You see? 2,200 meters, 8 kilometers offshore the Côte d'Azur. You see? And so when you dive, you come onto the seafloor, you see, and you see, I mean, it's something like very frustrating, you see? And it's quite easy to monitor. You just go and see. You don't have to count in that case, you see. But I mean, it's quite important to understand how the litter is behaving at sea, where it goes, where it's accumulating, and so on. Typically, from these images and from monitoring, it's clear that there is a big question now. We know that the seafloor is a sink for marine litter in general, even for microplastics. We know that most of the papers indicate no change for the last 20 years. It's very strange, except in remote areas like in the remote islands, in the Arctic, for instance, in sediments also. So we have a few papers indicating clear trends increasing amounts, but most of the studies indicate that there is no. And so this generates, an important question, where they are going. And we are sure that, I mean, what has been discovered in terms of garbage patches and so on at the surface, there will be exactly the same in the deep. And monitoring is in a way, also supporting this kind of information.
So this video that you show, is it a hotspot? Is it just there and it's very different a few meters from there? Or is it like this over very large areas?
So the situation, in fact, is when you go on the deep, when you dive very deep, when it's flat, you will have some litter everywhere, but really dispersed, I will say. It's not large amount. But each time you have a hole, a wreck, something like any structure that may retain the litter, then that will be filled. And that's very impressive. So it's not everywhere, but I will say it's common. When you dive, I may have some other, you see, it's quite easy some other images, you see. And the date of the items were more than 40 years, most of them. We have some brands that were identified. They are not existing since the 90s.
Okay, wow, that's impressive. Actually, we have a question from Ryota in Jamstack asking a question that is relevant here. Is asking, is there any movement for the harmonization of methods for collecting micro and macroplastics, I guess, on the seafloor?
Yes, there is a meeting next week organized by Japan, and Jamstack will participate on that. All experts are there to discuss harmonizing the measurement of microplastics. Exactly, yes, for sure it is.
Okay, so we will know more in a couple of weeks, I guess. I have another question for you. You've been talking of plastics and the different kind of plastics. So I get polyester or polyethylene and all of this. Do we have any incentive on measuring the additives in the plastic? Because from what I understand, they're also really important, and they are an important component into the harm on biodiversity. So do we have any work being done on these additives?
Yeah, I think we are at the stage of research. Yes, I think we are at the stage of research for additives. The point is that, I mean, chemists are able to monitor chemicals, and many additives have been regularly monitored since a long time. But relating to plastic pollution, we are really at the stage of understanding. So we know, for instance, that phthalates that are used to plastify the polymers, they are not just only related to plastic pollution. So if you find phthalates, it's not just because there is plastic in sea. It may come from other applications, you see. And so in terms of interpretation, it may not be specific to plastic pollution, and that's a problem. And also the way additives are behaving is different from those from the polymers. For instance, if you put some plastics freshly crafted directly at sea, in a few weeks, all the phthalates will be leached from the plastics. And then you may find them at sea. But I mean, if you go in the middle of the ocean, there will be far less additive as components of the plastic itself, just because they have been leached, you see, when the plastic is still there. So I mean, the behaving are different. If you want to monitor, you have to consider that, I mean, interpretation will be different if you monitor the plastics, the additives, or the plastic, you see?
Yes, okay, all right, thank you.
So we find the additives everywhere, but I mean, actually it's more at low level. We didn't reach the toxicity levels that may come if we just continue that way.
But I think it kind of relates to what you were saying before, that we can see some biology on plastic that travels across the world. We can also see some additives or even some toxins that take the place of additives and travel across the world. And that's for sure something that needs to be monitored.
It will not work that way, because what is happening is that the plastic is buffering some contaminants that are hydrophobic, so that have high affinity to non-water materials. So it's things like capturing, buffering all. But if there is no in the water, so then at the end, like any for any chemicals, there will be an equilibrium. And so if there is more in the water, there will be more on the plastics until saturation has been reached, you see? And so as far as the plastic is traveling offshore and far from the coast, then there will be less in the water, because pollution is mainly coastal. And then the chemicals will dissolve, you see? Okay,
will be released again.
Only very offshore. And if you have a lot of chemicals buffered, I mean, captured by the plastics, the problem is not with the plastic. The problem is with the chemicals in the water. It's industrial pollution in coastal waters that is a problem. And you will find more contaminants, chemicals fixed on the algae, on silt, for instance. You see all this kind of organic matters and so on, than on plastic. So plastic is a vector for pollution, but it's a minor vector. It's not very important in terms of contamination. And one point, again, is that if the plastic is able to capture from seawater, once ingested, if the plastic is virgin, clean, then it will also pump the contaminants from the stomach. It has been shown already in some papers that you may use the plastic to clean the stomach also, you see? And so, I mean, it's a joke actually, but it works also,
Yeah, I will not swallow plastic, thank you.
No. You don't start a company to sell plastic pieces. Huh?
No. We have a very last questions. Question from Florence Cutat. Plastic can be transported or buried quickly. It can vary a lot depending on weather conditions. How do you see this time variation included in global monitoring?
I mean, this is the limit for some indicators. If you are measuring floating plastic, microplastics, for instance, it's true that 1 hour after they have gone, they're not there. So when you assess microplastics, you consider large areas. Within MSFD, for instance, we have some region like Bay of Biscay where we have mean values altogether, so that we can avoid any effect of patchiness, these kind of things. And but some indicator there is no problem. For instance, if you assess microplastic in sediments, it's a sink. They will accumulate in areas where there will be a high level of sedimentation. And then it's the same for sea turtle, for instance. They are ingesting plastics. If you put them in a tank, after rescue center, you put them in a tank. In 2 weeks, they will excrete all the litter there. So it means that when you assess stranded sea turtle, the amount of litter it has in the stomach, it means that it's covered all the area covered by sea turtle within 2 weeks. That will be something like 50 kilometers. But we know about that. We know that it's it's good indicator for an area and not locally only. Yeah.
Okay, all right, that makes sense.